In a minute, we'll be joined by Aaron Bowersock to discuss a couple of things that have been happening as of late, in particular with the People's Summit, with protests and activism in general. He's been on the Benjamin Dixon Show before, and we're glad to have him back tonight. So we'll be speaking now with Aaron Bowersock. He's a Seattle designer and activist with Socialist Alternative. He's been building a working people's party for the 99%. Aaron, thanks so much for joining me. How's it going for you?
Well, thank you for having me. It's going pretty good. It was a little cold out here. I know in People's Summit it was about 95. It was only 53 today out in Seattle.
Man.
So
I thought it was bad here. Last week here in Boston, It was about 45 degrees, but today we were about there in Chicago. It was 95 degrees, so I know that's a big adjustment going back. But let's start there in Chicago, man. You showed up to Chicago. You were a part of the People's Summit. And one of the things that I'm interested in doing is talking with people who actually went. I couldn't go. I wanted to go. I had an invitation to go. I appreciate the invitation from over there at the People's Summit, but because of family reasons, I could not make it. But I'm interested in talking to the people who did, who invested their time and money in going. And I know you. We met, prior to the DNC, but we were at the DNC protest together. Tell me your thoughts about your experience at the People's Summit and what you got out of it.
Sure. Well, let's just talk about that first night. Yeah, you're right. You and I, we met while protesting in the DNC. It was about 100 degrees outside. And,
Yeah.
there was incredible pressure, misinformation flying around on the ground at the DNC. And actually, a lot of those people who I met there, both delegates and protesters, a lot of those people I saw back at the People's Summit. So that very first night, it was like a reunion of sorts. And it was also a first-time meeting for a lot of the activists that I've interacted with just online, whether it's my Florida friends chasing DWS around Florida, or my Cali friends who do their activism there, or the Texas people who are working against SB4 down in Texas. So for me, the initial reaction was like, yeah, these are my people, So I was very excited to be back with them and sharing what I'm doing up here and learning what they're doing down there.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things, let's jump into, I don't want to talk about so much the controversy around the People's Summit, because I can get some of the organizers on the show to talk about that. But I want to talk about a portion of it from your perspective, because there's a lot of noise in the progressive circles, people trying to tear down the summit for whatever reason, and we can discuss that. But you, as a person who committed your time and your money and your energy to go there and be there, what was your main takeaway? Do you feel like two things, two angles that I want to talk about? One, did you feel like your voice was included, or your perspective was included, more important than just your voice? Your perspective as somebody who has exited, somebody who is not looking to support the establishment, but you're looking to connect with other voices. Do you feel like you were properly represented there and that angle was represented there?
This is where the legitimate portion of the criticism comes in, because it was clear to me that the agenda was pushing this idea of working within the two-party system. I mean, anyone who's followed Bernie Sanders since he first announced, he's been saying this all along. He's like, what we got to do is reform the Democrats. So in that regards, no, me as someone who is with an organization trying to build a party for the 99%, we believe that working within the Democratic Party is like begging the ruling elite for concessions, when what I want to do is challenge their right to rule. So that perspective was not represented, but also was on the agenda, and it is not what Bernie calls for.
Right.
Of course, you have people there. Many of the attendees, a lot of people are like me. There was a few socialist alternative people there. There was Green Party. There was Draft Bernie, of course, who Roseanne DeMoro gave a shout out at the main Bernie speech, So the presence was there, but not in any official capacity. And I do understand and agree with that version of the that point of the criticism. But what I got out of it, it was so much more. It was the conversations of people who, like me, you know, people with 9 to 5 jobs, or
Mm-hmm.
people with, maybe they're unemployed, or people with families back home, people working 2 to 3 jobs. These are
Yep.
actual people out in their community building things. And they
Right.
come here because they want to share ideas, learn what's happening up in Seattle, learn what's happening down in Texas, learn what's happening in DSA, learn what's happening in our revolution with the individuals working there,
Right.
and see if we can bring any of those back home. What I got out of it were learning how to speak to different communities that I'm not a part of, and understanding my place in the spaces that they've made. Because in order to have true coalition, you're going to need to understand where another organization or community is coming from without trying to strictly co-op in a superficial way. So
Mm.
it's a lot to think about, like, when I'm coming back here, because we know the only way forward is through coalition. And when I'm speaking to people, that's one of the main takeaways I got.
Mm. So, in the midst of perhaps and what you felt is an absence of third party representation, in the midst of that, you were still able to galvanize relationships, network. And you got something. It was worth your trip over, basically.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I also got to give a shout out to the people who put on this conference, because I'm talking about the working class people who put on this conference, because I've run conferences and
Yeah.
organized conferences before, and I know what can go wrong, and this thing ran smoothly. So shout out to everybody who
Yeah.
worked that conference, because we did not see you sweat. So, but yeah, it was a pleasure to be there, and you know, whatever you may think of it, even including the criticism, it prompted us to all get together, and
Yeah.
nothing had prompted us like that before.
And this is the last thing, man, Aaron. And this really I want because you and I we know each other well from Twitter, and we've been engaging in a conversation, ongoing conversation. It's this incessant need of a certain segment of so-called progressives to tear down the work that other people are doing. And here you are, a person who committed your time and your money and your effort to go there. And even though you were not fully satisfied with it, you were able to identify the good of it, and you were able to identify places where it could have been better for you and better in general. But you're a person who committed money to go, and you're not tearing it down, while we have a horde of so-called progressives trying to destroy the People's Summit and not have anything to replace it with, man. Like, I know you have a lot to say about that, so I'm going to stop before I talk. Tell me about what you've seen in that
Sure.
regard, and your opinion as a person who actually committed time and money to go to the People's Summit.
Yeah. I mean, to borrow a line from one of my Facebook friends, he was like, I'm sitting here flying economy class, and Soros still hasn't given that check he promised. So, um, but yeah, coming from that perspective, I mean, uh, I read I read this book once. It's called The Energy Bus, and it taught me, like, how to recognize when people are working with your energy and who to let into your life. Because, I think we all come to a point in our lives where we realize that, hey, I don't necessarily need to keep all these people around. I need to be, pardon me, I gotta change this lighting, it's driving me crazy.
Oh, no
I need to
problem.
be working with people who are actually working with me, right?
Right, right.
So, as far as the tearing down and stuff like that, I get the criticism, and I share a lot of the criticism, obviously, with the People's Summit. But when one is tearing down people who are sacrificing a lot to go out into their communities, like I mentioned, all the pressures they face at home,
Mhm.
to actually build something and work together, have all the criticism you want about the organization and the fact that they didn't let certain voices participate in an official capacity. But the people there, we're not just sitting there drinking Kool-Aid or Flavor-Aid. That's what it was.
The flavor,
Um,
right? Exactly.
we're coming in there, we understand, and we're having these discussions, and we know that when we come home, we don't need to stay in the lane of the two-party political system.
Right.
We're talking about disruption. We're talking about nonviolent militant action. We're talking about shutting down banks, shutting down City Hall. So these are the ideas. And I will say, for everyone that was there, um, to all the speakers, who many of them I do respect, and the journalists, I read their stuff and talk about it. That was all a backdrop for me and many of the people I talked to. I believe that if you get the attendees and many more that weren't able to go, put them in an old warehouse with a bunch of pizza, we would still end up with similar conversations, ready to fight back in our cities.
Aaron, listen, thanks so much for your time, man. I appreciate you just coming on and sharing your perspective. I probably will talk to as many people as I can that went, mainly because I couldn't go. And I want to hear, I'm loving hearing about the connections and the, I hate the cliche, but the synergies that came out of it. This has been Aaron Bowersock, a designer from Seattle. He works with the Socialist Alternative Party. Thanks for all that you do, man. How can everyone get up with you? Go ahead, finish that thought.
Yeah, I actually wanted to give a shout out. There's a few, speaking of like running independent stuff. So there are 2 independent candidates running for office here in Seattle.
For sure.
Nikita Oliver, she is a Black Lives Matter activist, a poet, a lawyer, and an educator, and she's running for Seattle mayor under the People's Party banner.
Awesome.
And then there's also John Grant, who is he's a affordable housing activist running as a Democratic Socialist for City Council. And they are both running on the affordable housing platform for Seattle. And of course, I got to shout out Ginger Jensen, Socialist Alternative, running for City Council in Minneapolis. So you can find me, A Bowersock, on Twitter, but my main plug wants to be for those candidates.
Awesome, man. Thank you for using your time to promote other people, man. That speaks volumes about your work and what you do and what you represent. And let's do it again as soon as we can.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I definitely wanted to speak with Aaron because, like I said, we wanted to go to the People Summit. We couldn't go. But I really kept up with what was going through his timeline, Tim Black's timeline, really just tuning in from people who were there, making the sacrifice to be there. And to me, people who actually went, you know, whatever their criticisms are, those are the criticisms that I want to hear. I want to hear from the people who went to support it and found something while they were there. Those are the voices that need to be heard. And then we'll get a chance to speak with some of the organizers as time goes along, because the People Summit has been doing something fabulous just within the last 2 years. They've done something fabulous, and I think they can continue to do something fabulous. And we have to realize that not every organization and not every event is going to be perfect for every person, but there's something that we can glean from it and something that we can incorporate into what we want to do as progressives, and I think we should take advantage of that.